This study of the Independent School District 535 School Board is called to order at 5 p.m. on Tuesday, September 24th, 2019 in room 137 of the Edison Building. Present at the board table is Mr. Michael Munoz, Superintendent of Schools, and a non-voting ex officio member of the board. Also present is Ms. Wendy Edgar, the Assistant Board Clerk. Ms. Edgar, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Amundson? Here. Chair Barlow?
Here.
Ms. Marvin? Here. Ms. Nathan? Here. Mr. Stusner?
Here.
Ms. Seelinger?
Here.
Ms. Workman?
Here.
Let's stand for the pledge as you're ready.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
2.01 approval of agenda, Mr. Munoz. Changes.
Move approval. Second.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Oh. Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
So first of all, thank you for being here. The willing and unwilling. I think we all are willing. What I am proposing we do is approach the items that are part of your packet or will be displayed in a systematic fashion, beginning, first of all, with what's called the annual school board items. And I've asked Ms. Edgar to provide the historical background regarding this. It'll appear in a moment. As she's positioning herself, I think we each will discover that this may not be what we actually think it is. It may, however, be a template for something that can become. Okay? So, Wendy, if you wouldn't mind giving us some background regarding this.
Sure. This document actually started out when I first took over the job as Assistant School Board Clerk. I went back through a bunch of old meetings and started developing when things were happening, normally every year, just to be a tickler file for me to remind me that some of these things were coming up. So there's a lot of things that we've taken off over the years, and there's several things that we've added over the years. But it really is just an internal working document. But that's what it started out to be.
Now, having heard that, I'd like to query the board and maybe even cabinet. So that's what it started out to be. What do you perceive it as is now?
I have a question. That's supposed to be on board doc?
No, I didn't put it
You
in.
didn't put it on board doc. Okay.
I think it was given to you at one of the study sessions. I don't remember which one. Might have been one of the first ones that we
I
had.
needed a sanity check that hopefully.
Sure.
I just sent it out in an email just to remind everybody what it was.
Those.
So I think what I'm hearing is that this is a tool that Wendy uses for execution of her own job, and that if the board feels like there are other things that they wish to see on an annual basis, it wouldn't necessarily go on that calendar. It would be tracked in some other way. Is that?
I would concur with your assessment. Really what you're saying, well, what I'm hearing is if the board wants a tool to track what it needs to do or what is expected or required, then the board certainly should develop that. Now, having said that, let me use this also as an opportunity to say thank you to whomever attended whether it was an NSBA or MSBA meeting where the how to govern. What's the name of the book you guys?
Oh, the policy governance?
Yeah, the policy governance book. What that provides for those who have started to read that, and I'm excited. I broke right into it, ordered it as suggested. Julie did arrive by Amazon Prime in 2 days, like you said it would. And great information. What it does is, I think, provide a lens as to how we, the board, should govern ourselves and to understand minimally the difference between operational policies, of which the majority of the policies we approve are operational in nature, and to consider that there's an opportunity for boards to develop educational policies. Again, I'm not trying to teach or present the book at this time, but what it does do, in summary, Melissa, is allow the board to take more ownership of its own destiny, to include being able to engage in a meaningful self-evaluation. And so, short answer, maybe long answer to your question. This is simply an internal facing document that Wendy developed for her usage, which has kind of made its way into a broader usage of board members, perhaps cabinet.
Yeah, it's it's a draft to give the board an idea of what types of agenda items you can expect in each month. And those only ones that are on there are ones that we do on an annual basis. However, I call it a draft because something may happen that, we had to push it to February instead of January. But these are things that you do on an annual basis. This is the time of the year when they're presented. Doesn't mean there won't be other agenda items during those months, but these are the things that occur on an annual basis. So it's more, I see it more as a communication tool to the board to see, as you look down the road, you can see what potential agenda items will be coming during each month.
Director Nathan.
So I think I expressed some puzzlement with how to give feedback to the document. And one of the things that I've been tracking is not necessarily Wendy's great job of bringing things on a timely basis, but things that might be brought up at board meetings where we ask for either a follow-up or can you come back in a few months. For example, in November of 2018, Director Barlow asked for a follow-up presentation on the comprehensive needs assessment, and Brenda Wichman was enthusiastically said, we'd love to bring it back. So I just don't know who keeps track of that, who's responsible for saying, that's going to be, come to the agenda at a certain time. And there's a number of those. There's Director Marvin asked for a report on the communication audit once a quarter or twice a year. We had an annual report on CTEC in June of 2018, and we haven't seen a report at the end of the year for the last school year. And then there's various things that we're told about in the board updates, which are great. We're starting this program, but I don't know what the cycle is for when we hear how does the implementation going, or when those follow-up reports are. They're mostly informational. They're not something we have to take a vote on, but I don't know who's responsible for keeping track of how we fit that in to either a study session or to an informational item as a board meeting.
So if I may ask either the superintendent or Wendy, was this ever envisioned to capture or reflect the things that Director Nathan is speaking to?
No.
I think I agree, we do need a process for that, but I would also just suggest too that the board somehow, at the end of a meeting, need to agree on what, because there was a recent email I received that requesting additional information that I didn't think was agreed upon at the board table. So, and we run into the same issue at cabinet meetings. Sometimes we forget to say, all right, what did we decide today? Who's responsible for what? So I think we've dropped the ball on that. It should be in minutes, I assume. But how does that get transferred into the board chair and vice chair meetings on Mondays determine when it should come back and should it come back? I think we have to be careful. We have to establish a protocol. If one board member says, hey, I want this, does that mean it happens? And at one time, I think we tried to establish if you get a second, then it gets discussed at the chair and vice chair meeting to determine if it gets on and when it should. But I agree, I think we don't have a process in place to document the examples you gave, so we can discuss it at one of our Monday meetings. It just gets lost, and everybody gets busy and forgets about it.
Director Nathan, did you have a suggestion, recommendation, idea, thought as to how? I mean, I fully appreciate what the superintendent expresses willingness to discuss it, but if you already have done the work,
Well, I don't want to steal her thunder, but I believe that the word that might come out of Director Amundsen's mouth is a plus delta. We've talked in the past about how we used to see the board at the end of a meeting do some sort of wrap-up, where we're really clear about that. It doesn't have to be that format, but I do like the idea at the end of the meeting where this is what we agreed to, put this on the calendar, put it on exec's calendar. I mean, I don't know of any other models other than what we've seen in the past.
Director Martin?
Well, and as a follow-up to that, I think this is a good opportunity for us to decide quickly, because it shouldn't be that complicated, how we're going to do that process. Perhaps add an agenda item at the end of every meeting where we do a plus delta, or the board or whomever says, these are things that we want to see at a future meeting. And then I think we can decide either someone will second that and then it goes to the executive meeting, or, because it's not a committee, or we vote. So these are the things that we agree as a board we want.
So like have a board meeting summary agenda item like at the end, where you guys decide what from that meeting you want more information on? Is
Well,
that what's jumping?
no. Either the board chair or the person who's raised the idea would say at that time, the board chair would say, are there issues that you want to revisit or you want to have a report on at an upcoming meeting? And at that point, either people could just suggest them and maybe get a second, or we could vote. Sometimes we have a discussion where there's one person who's all about something and nobody else cares. So I'm thinking that there should be some sort of consensus among board members that, yeah, we want to revisit this.
Director Seaman?
So I'd like to just step back as we start to move off the calendar path. So I have looked at this document over time on occasion, but I know that Wendy updates it. I look at it as her, much like I do her draft meeting agenda, which she would prefer that we don't look at it because it's not set in stone until the meeting is made live. So I think my question if I may suggest, we wrap up the discussion on the need for or the wish for or whatever of a calendar, not Wendy's calendar, but a calendar of some sort before we move on to what I would probably term the parking lot items or something at board meetings.
I sort of see it partly like when we're briefed on an item and then we know it's going to come back for action. And it's always comes back for action at the next meeting, regular meeting. Okay, but there are some things that are farther out. For example, well, okay, when we get the MCA scores, we'll bring a report back to you. And I know you always do bring a report back to me, so that's a bad example, but, when is that going to happen? I mean, at least say it's going to be in this month so that it doesn't, fall under the radar. That's a terrible example to use because that's one of our kind of routine things. Or if we say, well, we're going to really look at Action 100 this year, and we'll have some information for you sometime. And that kind of gets lost in the shuffle of where is sometime. So I kind of like to see things pinned down a little bit more because in my, I hate to say this, 8.5 years on the board, I've gone back and looked through some of my earlier notes, some of which are somewhat comprehensible, and it's like, we didn't follow up on this, we didn't follow through on this, and it just got dropped. And I think maybe I don't want to put words in Director Nathan's mouth, but I think maybe what she's looking for is a more systematic way to keep track. I am not good at developing that kind of a system because I've kind of failed at it for the last 8 years. So if she or anybody else has any idea about what that might look like, for me personally, it would be really helpful because I don't want to be inventing the wheel if somebody else has, already got on a rocket ship.
So I think Director Seelinger has done an excellent job in kind of providing clarity. One is a calendar, and the other one is with the parking lot, again, for simplicity of discussion. So I think we have understanding regarding, quote, the calendaring, also known as the annual school board items, okay? That really is something internal that Wendy uses that she certainly affords us the opportunity to be aware of. During the conduct of normal school board business, we're obviously aware of the things we need to be aware of. Now, the parking lot thing, which Director Nathan has alluded to, is legitimate, and often and I will have to suggest that it falls probably to the responsibility of the board to do this. Referencing again, putting a plug in for not just the reading of the putting policy governance to work, but perhaps the internal adoption of that. Because what that also references is at the end of each school board meeting, rotating the responsibility from meeting to meeting, that a board member reports out as to what we agreed to and what we're looking forward to following up with. All of that to say that we're not voting on anything tonight. I think the discussion was important and that Director Nathan raised it as a concern, and I wanted to bring it to light so we could have the discussion. And what the superintendent has already proposed is that Chair, Vice Chair, Superintendent will follow up and do our best to come up with a remedy to this.
Well, when we get to the protocol part of the meeting, maybe we establish a protocol for getting things on the agenda. That would capture your concern, and I think there's been other questions about, well, how do we get something on the agenda? And the past practice has been, we didn't have a really good clear practice on how it gets to the former executive committee. But that's where the decision has been made since I've been here. But we don't have a really good process in place on how do you get things to that area, to that committee.
Director Marvin.
If we're ready to sort of finish up the conversation about the calendar, my suggestion or my input would be I think it's really useful for board members, for others, so that we keep in mind sort of what's the flow of the year. And I haven't looked it over recently, but my one suggestion would be if there is a board member or someone else who thinks of something that perhaps should be on there, might be useful, perhaps we could send that to you. I have no suggestions right now, but it sounds to me like we're feeling that it's a useful tool and we'd like to continue. Wendy's willing to continue doing that.
Yeah, I'd like to back up with Director Nathan. You mentioned Jean Marvin said something on some date. Can you repeat what that was?
It was just an example. Of
Okay, right. What was that example?
A board member had brought up asking for a follow-up presentation, asking for a report on the implementation of the communication audit once a quarter or twice a year.
So
that was part of the discussion, but again, I don't think that it was before I was on the boards, but when I watched the meeting, there wasn't a way for the board to then say, and this is going to happen.
Right. So I don't know if it ever happened or not, but I think I liked your example in that we tend to have it, this is good, well, blah, 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 and then it just kind of spins and drifts off somewhere and we never get back to it, or not in a timely manner, or, what was that I'll pick on somebody. What was that Director Schlusner said a couple board meetings ago? Were we supposed to follow up on that? What's going on with that? That's the kind of thing I'm interested in keeping track of.
And I think we're in agreement. I think we each are. So we, I believe, have gotten it. And so Director Nathan, and then we'll,
I just wanted a clarification of Dr. Marvin's statement about the items that we might send to Wendy, that we might want on the annual school board items would fall into the category, as you described it, of what would be regularly on the agenda over the course of a year. Right. Not a one-time.
Not a one-time.
Right.
But it would be
Something that-
would be continual.
Like an ongoing practice.
I think, isn't that what you said?
Well, it's things that happen annually, like January, which was up there, January.
Okay.
New board member, I mean, that's every January, it's when that happens, or the month that, when we get the scores, when we have to get certain things approved, we know we have to bring it on at this month, because that's something you do every year. That's kind of what it is, it's capturing those things that are ongoing annually forever.
I see,
Director Schulzen.
sorry.
To take this a little further, I honestly don't know why we wouldn't just have this as a public document to the community as well. There's nothing privy to the board on here as board specific. And if it's just from a website point of view, part of the board page, then the community can see, oh, I'm always interested in X. I see it happens at this time.
And the only fear I have of that, and then we address it by putting draft on it, because let's say on this month, this is supposed to happen, and for some reason, MDE didn't get something to us in time, then.
Oh, of course.
Or
You
say
put
tentative or.
things like that around. But I do think it'd be useful for the public as well.
And the important thing that we're, I think, hearing, realizing is that this is not, well, my little son likes to say, Dad, it is what it is. So, this is what it is, yes, most definitely. And we're now echoing some potential value that we see, perhaps for the board and community. And I think we could probably move forward with that directly.
I'd like to see, I mean, I'm looking at Wendy's document, and I know that's what she uses to just make sure she keeps on track with the bigger things. But I think it would be maybe interesting to look at this and figure out what kinds of things fall under operational versus what kinds of things might fall under governance, in which the board has to make a specific decision or approval of. June, the approval, or whenever we approve the budget, end of May, first part of June. That requires board approval, as opposed to approval of field trips where there is a charge for students. Yeah, the board has to approve it, but that, I look at that as, completely operational, that we don't get into by saying, well, I think the charge should be, or why is this activity have a charge for it, or who's going to pay for it? I mean, that's not, to me, that's below the line. That's for you guys to sort out. So I don't know if that would be helpful for others to look at it, maybe a little bit like this or not.
And this makes the point that the superintendent alluded to earlier. At what point does what a single board member say rise to that level of we're going to do it? And even though perhaps each of us tonight could say, as a board, yeah, let's do it, we really, it's nothing we're voting on, but I think it's important. And this may create some of the, well, I remember us talking about, and it was suggested, but nothing was actually agreed upon. So protocols, which I think this is a natural segue into protocols. Though, Director Seelinger?
I think this speaks to many things that we've discussed, because I personally don't believe this should be a public document. I don't, in the format that it's in. I hear it's not a big deal, put it out there, but I think it's confusing. I think it's a changing document. I don't think there's any background for someone looking at it to interact with it. And so, to Chair Barlow's point, when we have a difference of opinion, then how do we resolve that? My suggestion would be, again, that this is an internal document, and if the board feels strongly about having some sort of calendar, if you will, or schedule of events or something, that perhaps be designed separately and then made available on the website under the constraints that Ms. Nestler would tell us has to be, anything put on the website has to be in a certain format so that we all know.
Which then just covers the governance portions.
Okay, you did a fairly thorough job of talking that.
Before we move on,
Okay.
however, I've heard both sides, so
About making
this
it
is a perfect
public?
example.
It is.
What do we do? Do you want us to make it public or not? So, I know we're not voting, but we can come to consensus on how you want us to handle the calendar.
So I think Director Seelinger offered what a public view would be like, if I'm correct. So we're differentiating between operational and governance. So that which would perhaps be made available on the district website would be, again, Deborah, I don't want to speak for you, so I'm going to cut the ball. So how would you?
If I had to make a suggestion, as you have shown good leadership in the past, Chair Barlow, I would suggest you ask for a subcommittee to create a board item calendar that could be developed and then put on the website under the school board tab. Perhaps with some support of Ms. Edgar, but Ms. Edgar would not be tasked with that work.
Which calendar are you talking about? Are you talking about Wendy's calendar?
I'm saying create, if I feel if the board wants a calendar or list of items to be made public, that the board should take responsibility for creating that.
Okay.
Versus having Wendy look through this and deciding what's governance and what's management.
Okay, but we're not talking about the board calendar for what kinds of things we need to follow up on. That's a separate thing.
Correct,
Okay.
correct.
I just want to
Yes.
make sure I
Oh,
knew
yes,
which
thank
one
you.
you were talking about.
Yes, thank you.
Although maybe we should have, I don't know, if we need a full board discussion or a separate study session on how we do that calendar, or if there should be another subcommittee or a subcommittee to work on that. If we do, I would strongly recommend that Director Nathan be on or be in charge of that committee, since she was the one who brought up some of the project things.
Director Martin.
I believe that we decided we were going to have the discussion later in this meeting about how we deal with issues that come up at board meetings that we want to discuss later, and how we will ensure that they get on a future agenda. I think the discussion we're having right now is what we do with that and if we want to expand it. In my 2 cents, I think it's just great the way it is and the format that it's in, and that it is not outward facing. I think if things come up, like when test results are going to be announced, and we think that the public needs to know, we can put that on the website, but it doesn't, I don't think showing them that is going to be useful. The entire thing.
Director Evans.
I just weighing in with our own 2 cents, right? I don't think it needs to be accessible to the public necessarily if doing so creates a lot of extra work.
Okay, so let's do this. Yeah.
I would just say, to me, the first thing we have to resolve is, we all want to make it public, and we're not voting, but I guess if you wanted to make it public, when I look at you, kind of shake your head.
Well, before you do that, even I would agree with Deborah's assessment of, from my point of view, it's just about transparency of things that make sense. You know, if there are governance things that come up on an annual basis, to me, that makes sense. It doesn't necessarily have to be exactly what is presented there. Because folks are right, you know, the general public doesn't need to know all of those things, But I do think they would appreciate some of the annual governance things that do come up that don't really ever change, that quite frankly, after it's put up, wouldn't necessarily be any work for anybody after that point. That would be helpful.
Okay.
Well, I got halfway around.
Yeah.
Since we're-
You're
since
not,
we're
or
going.
which one are you, Mark?
Since we're two-sensing, I, having been a board watcher for years before being on the board, in order to track what was happening at the board, I had to get very good at board docs. Once I understood the cycle, it made it easier. I think if we're going to ask the public to be informed stakeholders, I think we have to go a little farther in helping them to understand our work. And I would be in favor of a much simplified version of this, not even by time, but just, these are the common decisions that the board makes over the course of the year, that we feel are the most educate our public about our work. Because I think one of the things we find, especially in referendum season, is how little the public knows about what we really do. And sometimes it's good if we sort of tell our story beforehand, before we have to tell them our story. So I would be a halfway modified, not by time, so that nobody says, you didn't do it in January, and not have to explain. That's where I'm at.
Director Workman, you had your hand up?
No, I'm good.
So the original subcommittee, were there volunteers who perhaps wanted to rise to the occasion?
Oh, I didn't put my 2 cents in.
I
I didn't. So did the 2
okay.
cents, you started with Mark and then you,
Okay.
Deborah said something and then you quit with
Go
Kevin.
ahead.
So I'm at the end of the alphabet, I'm used to it. I think I like Director Nathan's idea where it's not tied to a specific month. If you wanted to, you could say something like, even during the first semester, these are generally the kinds of things that we will do, or, if you wanted to break it up by, first semester, you might see this, second semester, you might see that. If it's just by year, I'm fine. I think monthly is not a good idea for.
My 2 sneezes.
Is that your 2 cents?
So you're looking for nods?
Well, I think what I'm hearing is some version of this on the website. My fear of having a subcommittee, which if the subcommittee sticks to just what's on the sheet, that's fine, but I wouldn't want the subcommittee to add additional things without working with us on that. But I think we can take what's up there and make it ADA compliant and put it on the website under the board section. We can do that. And I kind of like the idea of maybe by semester, so you at least have a rough idea when you might see this thing, and this way it protects us if we're off a month here or there, we should be fine.
Okay. Director Adams.
So when you say without working with you on putting things on, additional things on, I'm assuming things like the school board would like to do an annual self-evaluation.
Yeah, I
would
mean,
be
this
something
is-
that we have.
Yeah, I'm going back to, this is things that happen every
Yeah.
year. Every year you have to approve a budget in June. Every year in January is when you, new office. I mean, these are stuff that happen every year. If the board agrees that every year we're going to do self-evaluation, then yeah, we can put that on there, but that hasn't happened since I've been here. But that's something that could be
Just
added.
for instance.
Yeah. But then you commit yourself to that because you put it out there in the public that you're going to do that, which
Sure.
isn't I'm not saying it's a bad thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Any new voices to this old issue?
Just to expand a little bit what you said, I would see that self-evaluation could be on the Wendy calendar and on the board calendar. So there would be some overlap of things that are strictly board work, but things that happen routinely that the public should know about. Because I look at the board calendar, that's how we follow up.
Thank you, Director Work.
So then the challenge would be, as a board, not as an individual, you'd have to agree on what additional things should we add to that. Not, you don't have to do it tonight. It could be an ongoing document. We could update it as that, as that happens.
And that's a very valid point, in that I think most of us as individual board members may leave here thinking that all we have to do is contact Wendy to say, put it on the docket. And so, that being said, I think we're headed in the right direction, and we'll see how it pans itself out initially, and grow and build from there. Director Amundsen, and then I think it's probably time to move to the next item without shorting anyone. Again, if you have new thoughts, new energy to devote to this, we're always looking.
Just a clarifying question then. So is it something that Wendy is maintaining as the document owner, or?
For the board,
Yeah.
for the web.
Well, I mean, now I'm hearing that there are two types of calendars, so I'm just confused as to what is Wendy's calendar.
Really what I
what
see is
our
we'll take
calendar.
everything on there and just have Heather make it ADA
Pretty.
compliant and pretty, and put it on the website.
So take this document and make it maybe semester-based as opposed to monthly-based.
Yes, yeah. And make it look good, and then make sure it meets the ADA requirements. And
But you're not asking us to tell Heather or you how to do it. You're saying that you're going to get it done.
we'll take that stuff.
Okay,
and
thank you.
So we don't need a subcommittee to do anything.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like to me.
I'm sorry.
So I said, so we don't need a subcommittee to do anything, but then Melissa suggested that maybe if the board had a self-evaluation thing, Melissa can't email Wendy and say, put this on the calendar.
Well, because we haven't
Yeah,
decided.
if
Well,
you establish that as a
right.
protocol, then you could add it, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, speaking of protocols, and that's next in queue, so to speak, so I will mention, Director Nathan, it still is important for us to perhaps develop some type of internal capacity to, whether it's maintenance on the part of the board, to brief or debrief toward the end of our board members, so that we're leaving with a shared understanding as to expectation and future or next steps.
Which I thought was going to be part of our protocol discussion,
Okay,
right?
perfect.
Okay.
Okay, perfect.
Getting done.
So, Wendy, if you'd be so kind, there's a draft that Wendy, of course, sent out that each of us have received. And interesting enough, and this is really the point in hand, okay? Director Nathan and I appreciate the effort she's expended. As an individual board member, she, provided input, and has offered input for consideration. Okay. I think what also in discussions with the superintendent and Wendy, we're also wanting to maybe develop a protocol as to, well, how many board members does it take to commit the cabinet, the superintendent, staff to, invest X amount of time to follow up on those individual things we may want or feel should be. And so this, again, protocol is perfect, okay? And so we'll look at the draft initially, and maybe as we do so, if there are comments, okay, input, I'd like to maybe just quickly, well, I won't say quickly, but walk through this to make sure there's a shared understanding, and if we need to clarify language or intent, we can do that as well, okay? I know communication was an area that Director Nathan, you had some insight and concerns he wanted to share. So you want to go ahead and speak to that?
So my approach, well, I guess it goes back to the protocol, because we had a discussion in April where we had a lot of verbal edits that we were making to Wendy. And I, as I remember correctly, was the only one who had sent written edits in ahead of time. And there were things that we didn't get to on those written edits the first go round. So when we got the email from Wendy asking us for feedback on this document, I sent my written edits in, and I guess this is a protocol I'm looking for clarification on. I didn't expect anybody to take these edits and incorporate it into a draft document. It's an exec team feedback thing. I think we should establish some sort of protocol if we do send something to the exec team, like, do we hear back? Do we not hear back? Do we wait till the meeting? The reason I put this together is that I thought it would be easier, as I'm explaining my perspective on this, if people had it in front of them. And my perspective on this is that having now gone to phase 3 training of MSBA last Friday in St. Cloud, which is a very lovely town, I felt like they really talked a lot about making sure you were developing things not in perpetuity, but for a certain level of permanence. It shouldn't just be for this week. It should be how your board operates. I think one of the reasons we needed this as new board members is that it didn't exist, and it took a very long time for me, speaking as myself, getting a hold of what I could say, what I couldn't say, how I could get information, how I could share information, and I didn't really feel like I was focusing on the issues. I was just focusing on how to talk to people. So this document was really important to me from that point. When I looked at the document, I felt like the organization of it would be improved if we talked about who was communicating with whom. Because if you look at the document, there's really, to me, 4 groups that are communicating. The board communicates with the superintendent, we communicate amongst ourselves, we communicate with staff and legal counsel, and we communicate with stakeholders. And as I looked through it, I also saw that we had what I thought was a little bit of a conflict in the draft of what we had said about communicating to stakeholders, meaning particularly forwarding emails to having the chair or the superintendent cover it versus going through the chain of command. So those were unfortunately for those of you who have the really ugly document with all the edits written in red, some of you also have another document that incorporates all the edits in that's a lot easier to follow. So I don't know who has what, and I don't know how you want to go through them.
Well,
Is this the original document?
No,
No.
This is your revision?
Right, so
This
the
is
one-
the pretty one?
That's the pretty one.
Okay, and the ugly one?
And the ugly one is on the back page, right? And for the most part, for the majority of what you see are simply words we already had in there that have been moved or categorized into the 4 areas that I identified. The language changes or additions are minimal.
okay, so keeping in mind, prior to Director Nathan's submission of proposed potential changes, the document itself was indeed a draft document. Okay, important to simply note that. And if the board is in agreement, we can simply allow Director Nathan to perhaps speak to the changes as she has proposed them, and then comment along the way if need be. So, Director Nathan.
Okay, so I'm going to start with the draft as we received it in board docs and then just map it to the changes. So the first change, superintendent board communications. So right now it states the superintendent will communicate with the board in the following ways. So I just added a heading, superintendent board communications. Still weekly updates, still cabinet notes, advance notice of items being sent to all staff building, and what I proposed adding was parents and the media, simply because Superintendent, it's been very helpful when we have gotten notifications from you, and we have this year, where you've said, I'm sending this out to parents, or this is a press release. So I thought, since this is already a practice, that we could just add those words in there.
And if I may direct Nathan, if you could just speak to the changes, and then if we have questions about why you proposed them, then that
Right.
would be appropriate.
Right, so that was a change.
Go ahead.
I just am a little concerned with the all parents piece because those originate in a lot of different places. Building principals are sending to their parents. Are we talking about just the things that come out of the superintendent's
Yes.
office?
Yeah.
So we may want to just
Yeah,
clarify that.
I was kind of reading it as all parents, as he's sending something out to all the parents in the district, not what individual buildings might be doing.
Okay, so that was your intent, superintendent.
Yep.
So I do have a question about, I do send you press releases, but sometimes I do not send you, if we get somebody, media says, I have this question about something. We respond to the question, but we do not send that to you. So I would like a little clarity there, so there's no misunderstanding down the road that it's
Oh.
strictly just press
Press
releases.
releases. Okay.
I don't understand, I need a little more clarity on staffing and crisis resolution. I'm not sure, I do let me know when there's, like when police are being called or an ambulance or something like that. But I guess the resolution part, I need a little explanation.
Wasn't that existing language?
That was
So that's
existing
fine.
No,
language. Right.
I have some notes on some stuff that we've done in the previous
Right.
meetings that we've
Great.
actually talked about, and we're going to recommend some changes as well.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So,
So, what's the good,
I'm thinking if we're on the bullet, let's talk about what everybody has on the
and
bullet.
that's fine for those board members who maybe were perhaps wondering, well, why is the cabinet here? Again, for this phase of our journey this evening, once we complete protocol, they're free to, well, the superintendent's saying they are, they can leave. But, so that's why we're at a good phase here. So, Superintendent, you...
yeah, I think, as Amy brought up, I think we need some clarity on all parents. I'm trying to think of some typical examples that we would send an email to all parents.
So I
Bus is late.
Yeah, whether.
Yeah,
I mean-
weather.
Okay. Here's something really cool that I heard on Monday when I was at a equity training on board governance. Board members, you wrap your arms around the system, around the district. Your fingers are not in the system. You're wrapped around the system. So with that thinking, bus is late. Does that mean we send a sky alert to Falwell parents because they're, let them know buses were going to run late, or we're out of electricity, or the phones are out? So there's a lot of that kind of communication that you're not aware of because we just do it.
But what has guided your judgment on the things that you've sent us so far this year?
Press releases, and if it's an emergency type thing, or typically if it's something that we were sending, we have a whole communication protocol for crises and stuff like that, and you're on that list. But I don't think we've ever sent you things that we may send specifically to just the building, unless it's like a school we had earlier, the Homestead County Public Health sent a letter, so you made aware of that.
Right.
I mean, but just a typical communication that we may have with a building or the parents of a building, I don't recall ever doing that unless it was a crisis situation or, public health matter or something like that.
So speaking for myself, the level of information that we've been getting so far this year, on what you've been sending on notice to all parents, the press releases you've been sending, those health notices like the whooping cough, chicken pox, staffing changes, that's what you've been sending us. On administrative.
Higher level, yeah, not all staff,
Right,
yeah.
administrative.
Yeah.
And then incident reports, like, at certain schools.
Yeah.
That level of what you've been sending us this year
Okay,
is
that's
what I'm reflecting
exactly
on.
what I got.
That would be my 2 cents.
Okay.
Director Adamson had her hand up.
And I totally appreciate what you're saying, and I agree that the level of discussion that you've been using is great. I just want to verbalize that anytime somebody in the community comes to me and say, oh, that email we just got, and if I'm clueless about it, it doesn't inspire confidence that the school board is doing its job, which in turn inspires confidence in the school district. So I would just say, keeping that in mind, that anything that you think might come up to school board members, and we don't want to look clueless or uninformed, that's my line of where that level is for information.
My response is, it's okay. It's okay to tell them. I don't know. I've been asked some things that I don't know.
Yeah,
I say, I'm not aware of that. I'll look into that.
that's what I'm saying.
And I'm the
There's some line.
superintendent. I
Right.
mean, we're a large organization.
Yeah.
There's no way all of us here could know every little thing that's going on. It's just impossible. And I think it's okay to tell people, I'm not aware of that.
But I'm saying the level of communication we have engaged in
Yeah.
helps me to be
Yeah,
able to be
but
informed.
there's going to be some times where you might get asked that because,
Yep.
yeah.
But that's my wish, is that if it's something that somebody's going to come to me and expect me to have knowledge the same as any parent in any other school would have knowledge, and I don't, then I'm feeling
Yeah,
uninformed.
if I'm a little passionate about this, it's because I still have the wounds from previous years that I sat down in a meeting with the chair and vice chair and a board member, and I thought what I heard was they wanted everything. So we started sending everything. One board member said, I love it. Another board member said, quit, I won't use his language, filling up his inbox. So that's why I'm a little passionate about this topic. So
Understood.
just want to catch it right. Right.
Director Workman, then Marvin.
I wanted to go back to something that Mike said that I thought was very interesting. You said you attended equity training on board governance?
I was on a panel
Okay.
by the Midwest and Plains Equity Assistance Center, and the theme of the theme used to be the Great Lakes Equity. The theme of the conference was governance,
Okay.
equity governance. So, yeah.
I'm just curious as to, were there board members at that? Since
There
it's-
were a few board members, a
when
lot
you're
of
talking
superintendents.
governance, it's sort of like, well, governance is in our pocket, and so,
But you didn't name the workshop, did you?
Yeah, I didn't name it. I got invited to be on the panel. There were a couple other superintendents. There were actually a couple board members on the panel from other states. There was another person, I don't remember what her title was, but, and to be honest with you, I was only there for one day because I had to fly back for a board meeting, but not everything we did on that Monday was, I would say, under governance. We even talked about the type of instruction that we're talking about now with Daggett. So that was the title of the conference, but move on, thank you.
Marvin Schlussman, same.
I was going to say, Melissa, I understand the concern when someone asks you about something, us, and we don't have the answer. I think that's kind of a good teachable moment to just say, school board doesn't do that. Understand your concern, but that's not our thing. And because I do think that many people in the public have an exaggerated idea about who runs things. And I think it's important to continue the narrative. We don't tell people how to do their jobs. So.
Sure. That isn't what I was referring to, but thank you for your input.
Schlussman.
I guess I'd just reiterate what Kathy was saying. I think the level of communication has actually been really good. The only thing that I guess I wouldn't mind is when there are media questions. I guess I'd appreciate, and it's up to the other board members as well, as you respond of knowing that as well. there has been times I've seen articles in the paper of like, wow, this is kind of new. And I didn't feel I should be kind of reading it into the news versus hearing it from yourself first.
As long as you're all okay with that, that's what I thought I heard.
Did you get a lot of media requests? I don't even know.
I probably get 5 or 6 a day.
Okay, well, if they're, you know, larger, substantial ones.
And sometimes too, like, I don't remember if you, Mark, or somebody asked me, I think it was the article on PSEO. We had no clue the story was being written. They didn't reach out to us. They somehow captured one of our kids and then talked to RCTC, and we were clueless on it. So understand it. They don't always
Sure.
get our side of the thing sometimes.
And if they do, they might not tell it completely correctly.
So can I ask, are you comfortable with the language the way it's written, or did you have a suggestion?
No, I'm fine with it, no, as long as I understand what you all mean by that.
I heard the suggestion, administrative staffing, as an edit.
Yeah.
That helped.
I'm
Yeah,
okay with
let's-
that.
That helped.
And that's what I'll think.
I mean,
Okay.
you don't want to know, you
No,
know,
I don't.
the
No.
70 parents that we're hiring.
Right, but we do in
every
Human
day.
Resources Action,
Yeah, yeah.
so
Yeah.
we
And I read them
eventually
all.
hear it in Human Resources Action. so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, Director Nathan?
Okay, so emergency information as soon as practicable. Existing confidential information sent by legal, and I just added counsel only because legal counsel is really their name.
And if I could simply add this, in speaking with Wendy, as a draft document, the language is not complete. So it's assumed that the reference is in regards to legal counsel versus just legal pad, you know.
Okay.
So,
Well,
And grammar.
I understand that that was a draft document, but aren't we, like, looking at the draft document and some of, with Kathy's suggestions and kind of cleaning it up, for lack of a better words, so that we can have something that's not called a draft anymore, but a final document? I think maybe, I don't want to speak for you, Kathy, but I think maybe that's sort of where you were heading a little bit in terms of
Yeah.
nailing down
Would-
final.
Would I like to never edit this again? Yes.
Yes.
point well made. So the next bullet, the superintendent.
Thank you, I had that question. All right, and then the last one was a new bullet that I was suggesting, because all the communication that we had listed about the board superintendent communication was either electronic or by written, and it was in, I think it was in one of the examples that Director Seelinger had offered, but I was suggesting adding the superintendent and board members, and I changed the language a little bit. The superintendent and board members may meet as needed, but in groups of no more than 3, because of the quorum situation. I just wanted to put it in there that it's okay to meet face-to-face with the superintendent.
I mean, it's happening or something.
Right.
You don't have a problem. Okay.
Did you have a different wording than what the document that Wendy gave us?
Yeah, so the superintendent and board members may meet as needed, but in groups of no more than 3.
I like that.
3 board members.
But
Right, 3 board members, right, thank you. 3 board members, Amy has suggested.
Okay.
And then thank you, Amy made a suggestion on the title of the next section, which was communication between board members. I was struggling whether it should be between or among. What does our English teacher say?
Between is 2.
Okay.
Among is more than 2.
So it would be communication among board members then.
Learned something new today. Thanks, Gene.
So if you look at this section, it has a lot more bullets than are currently there, and it was because I thought this section should focus on our communications, and a lot of the other bullets had to do with when we get an external email from stakeholders. So these were the ones that were left. Board members should not use reply all for any email and use BCC whenever possible. That was a discussion we had last time.
Wendy and I discussed removing the BCC. That it's, I don't generally use that, and I'm not sure that I'm comfortable using it. I just don't see the purpose, I guess, for our.
I remember the purpose in a past discussion was that if you aren't supposed to hit reply all and it's BCC'd, you can't hit reply all. And so it was protecting us. That was the discussion we had earlier. I'm not opposed to what you said. I just
Prevention.
prevention. I'm just sharing what I remember about the previous discussion.
But the goal is for board members to not reply all.
Right.
So if we don't reply all.
Then we don't have to worry
Right.
about
Then we don't have to worry
BCC.
about the BCC either.
But if
It is
that's,
an option.
Right.
right, but we could still use that option if that's how we do it. Okay. So we'll take out that BCC. So this was a conversation that we had that in my notes, I didn't really feel like we had clarified it, so I added a proposed language. Board members can send informational emails to all other board members. Emails should contain language that it is information only, do not reply all. The example I have is a recent email that came from Director Marvin with some suggestions for an alternative convention that we could attend. So we have those needs to just share information, and that was my effort of trying to reflect that protocol.
So, as we go through this, then, do we want to sort of have a consensus, like, is this what we want to do, or is this going to just get dropped again?
Well, the hope, the
Or
belief.
to add this language, this particular language? Or any particular change or anything else?
Sure.
Because otherwise, I'm going to leave here and I'm not going to know what we did.
Well, eventually, I think you all need to approve these at a regular board meeting, once you get them to the point where you.
Right. So we'll,
But if we can make a consensus now, then we don't have to hash through it all over again and say, well, I really didn't agree with this, and then we have to have the repeat discussion. I think it would, maybe we should have the repeat discussion for the benefit of the public, but we're doing that now.
Yeah, I guess I thought we were gaining consensus by having a discussion as we go through bullet item by bullet item. If that was unclear, then let's communicate that now and encourage you, as you have been the last 10 minutes on the communications, to continue providing your input, which Wendy then is incorporating into the document that will then be re-released back to the board. But I appreciate that, Director Workman.
So what I hear you saying is, if we have a problem, speak up.
Right.
Is that what I'm hearing?
I mean, that's what you guys have been doing, right?
right.
Yep.
Yeah.
So let's keep moving forward. Keep speaking up.
The next bullet I retained was grammar, spelling corrections questions should be sent to board clerk, and I was wondering if Wendy would like us to make it assistant board clerk? Because technically I'm the board clerk and you're the assistant board clerk.
Assistant sounds good.
That's true.
Especially for whoever the next clerk is might appreciate having that word assistant.
No, anyway, like it's so that we'll put it out there. And then something I added, because it had been in a previous draft, was issues with board colleagues should be discussed with chair.
So if we have a problem, just fill up a chair and talk about it.
Board chair, is that better?
Chair, I prefer to speak to the hand.
With
You
the
want them to address.
The board chair?
the board
Would
chair.
be appropriate. It's a draft, we'll clean up the language later. All right, next, oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, we encourage our kids to try and solve it first with the other person, is the expectation. You've already done that. Before you go to the chair about it? That could be
Excellent
Don's
points.
first question.
Yeah.
Have you talked to the other board
Right.
members?
That's only a question that will be asked for the next couple months. Go ahead.
So what I'm hearing Amy ask is that you would like to have issues with a board colleague should be discussed with that person first? Or do we just go right to the board chair and say, Don, what do we do if we have a problem with the board chair? Not saying that was,
No. Well,
or the, or
certainly,
going to exec, I mean, that would be
I know,
possible as well, but.
the public has seen something within each of us that caused them to believe that we possess capacity. And I'd like to believe that without it being committed to writing, that we would actually do that. And it doesn't have to be committed to a protocol.
So we're gonna take that last one out?
Issues with board colleagues should be discussed with the board chair?
Yeah.
We're going to take the whole thing out?
I wasn't suggesting that.
Oh, okay.
You were raising the issue of, well.
Talk to the other person
right,
before you
right.
go to the chair.
So do we have anybody have any good language for that one?
Issues with board colleagues should be discussed with the board chair. I don't know if anybody
How
else
about
wants to weigh in.
interpersonal issues among board members that cannot be
Resolved.
Resolve.
resolved should be taken up to the board chair?
That's good.
I like that.
In that person.
Interpersonal issues.
That's good resolved.
Wendy, did you get that into your writing? So I'm sure it's pretty-
Yeah, I'm waiting for Wendy.
I just have issues with board colleagues that can't be resolved should be discussed with the board chair. Somewhere,
Interpersonal.
and,
Interpersonal issues?
and,
Well,
Nice.
See, we're not going to get bogged down with language, are we, in terms of issues or interpersonal issues or problems, things.
but it might not be interpersonal in terms of, you know, Dawn, I'm having a problem with this board chair, or with this, not you, I'm having a problem with this board member because whenever we have pizza, they really smack their mouth together and it bugs me. Versus, I have an issue because this board member maybe said something in an environment that was not quite right. That's how I would view this. Anybody else? Jean, is that okay?
Yes.
All right, so there are some bullets under board communications that I moved to a third heading, which is communication between board members and district staff and legal counsel. And that would be on the existing draft, the fourth bullet, which is if a board member has a question or request of a cabinet member, they may contact them directly. The cabinet member will copy the superintendent on the response. That's what the language was before.
Yes, and we discussed that today, and we'd like that the superintendent would be included in the email.
The original email?
Yes.
Okay.
And then the question, we also discussed today, I'm supposed to, when you ask a question, I'm supposed to respond to all. So do you want them to send the answer to all board members as well? Okay, so,
Deborah?
Well, I would think it would be appropriate to do so. Who knows how many other board members may be thinking the same thing, or it heads off more than one board member reaching out to the same member of the cabinet regarding. I know John probably gets similar questions often from different board members, and if he's responding to each of us, and we'll know, oh, I don't have to ask that, someone's already asked it.
I think, Mike, we had that conversation a number of years ago about just to keep everything more efficient so that if 7 board members all have the same question about page 22 in the budget book, and we all send that to John, then he's got 7 emails, but if at the first email he gets it and he sends it to everybody, then he doesn't get 6 more emails that are asking the same question. So
Sounds very good there.
Just,
Thanks, Marvin.
thank you, just sort of a practical thing, because I think this protocol is really important, but I'm wondering if there are times when you just sort of don't follow it. For instance, if a parent asks me, do you know if they're offering whatever class for juniors? And I just asked Brenda, should that go through Mike too? I mean, if it's like a,
What was your example?
well, it's, a parent says, are they offering some class for juniors in high school? And I don't know. Can I just call her up and ask her without going through you, or do you want?
Well, I would suggest we follow our chain of command. I would encourage them to go to contact their building principal, ask that question. I mean, that's just my
Okay.
suggestion,
No, that makes sense.
because, to be
I-
honest with you, we probably have to call the school and ask them that question in a way.
To me, I think it's the one who probably doesn't follow that, okay, I shouldn't say the most. For example, I sent Heather an email today about a scheduling thing and did not copy you, although I know you were looped in. So I kind of felt like, I mean, it doesn't matter, right? It's easy enough to start doing that. I may have had a question for Carla about something, and it might be outside scope of school board too, right? So I guess it goes back to, in my head, it's not a big deal, so whatever, just do it. So I think what Jean is trying to say, and I will say it for her, and then she can tell me if I'm wrong, we will do our best, and if we miss it, then let us know, but give us some grace of that.
So I have an example that just happened with Melissa tonight. She had had a conversation with a parent who had a concern, and she said right back to that parent, have you contacted the student services person to make sure they know? Now, not just know, but I responded back just to her saying, I will check in as well to make sure they're aware. But I wouldn't feel like I needed to copy all of you
No,
on
I
that.
agree. I agree.
Does that kind of fit with what we're talking about?
Yeah, I agree. There's got to be some common sense.
Yeah.
Well,
Discretion. I like the
Discretion.
word
Right.
discretion.
Does it help to classify the question as being related to a board agenda item? You could respond to everyone as opposed to like a school or a student. I don't know if that helps or not.
Personally, I don't know if we need to get that deep into the weeds as to, well, is this an agenda item? Has it been an agenda item? Oh gosh, 5 years ago it was, so I guess I'll send it to everybody, or might it be on a future agenda item? Trying to sort out that is just, that's too much for
I think
my
discretion. I think
my
discretion.
brain to have to deal with. So I think discretion.
With discretion.
I was going to say, if we could just say, use your discretion as to whether it is of interest to the entire board or just to the individual. Because I certainly appreciate information when it's given, but
Well, my other hope on my little soapbox tangent is by having this meeting and others, and having the rest of our team, cabinet members here, that we're also building relationships, so that, if for some reason I started to email Jackie a bunch of stuff, and she was like, okay, this isn't okay, that she would either, hopefully feel comfortable to me and say, hey, we talked about protocols, and I think we're getting too far, and we could resolve that. So I think that's part of the, discretion and talking about it together, that we, can kind of have that common language and feelings about each other.
And I'd like to, at this point, ask of the superintendent, because on occasion, either Deborah or myself may be asked by the superintendent. I think board members may be kind of venturing, the example used earlier, around versus fingers in, management, governance, and so is this an appropriate place to potentially we're requesting information, but if it's management related, I mean, how do you want to deal with that? Or should we, is cabinet expected to speak to what degree are they obligated to respond to management related issues?
I think they could just put it off to Mike and say, you're the superintendent, you decide is this management
Yeah,
or
that's-
not, and then you can tell us, and then we can decide if we want to agree with you or not.
That's why, yeah, that's true. And you can, because you're the bosses. But that's why I've changed that piece, because I don't want to put them in a spot where they're making that decision. And
And it also helps you to see some patterns in our questions, because if you see us asking questions and you think, wait, that's something they should already know, maybe we missed passing on that information.
well, and I think it's only natural for them, look, I gotta drop everything and deal with this right now, because you're the board, you know,
But
so.
we're not their boss, you are.
True.
I mean, I think part of it could be we could help with that if, you know, I'm sitting next to John, so I'm gonna pick on him. John, I have this question, it's not urgent, get to it when you can. Versus if it's a crisis, I'm not gonna talk to John, I'm gonna talk to Mike.
So, kind of along those lines, a sample protocol that I found on another district, I don't remember what district this one is, but some other suggestions I have came from a district in California. But this one says, individual board members shall not request from the superintendent or staff the preparation of a report or materials not readily available and involving significant staff time unless the majority of the committee or the board approve the preparation of the report. The problem I see with that is, how do you define significant?
How would you define significant?
Well, there's been times we've probably spent 2 hours of cabinet meetings responding to questions, so that I would define that as significant. But I think there's also a difference between agenda item questions and just questions too. So
Was your question in regards to significant, not in regards to time, but in terms of subject matter?
No,
I think it's more the amount of time, it's going to take you. It's very similar to when we get the, we're getting a lot more of these in the last couple of years, is the Minnesota data request. If it's like, boom, I can get it, here it is, we send it, but if it's going to take us some time, then we charge them for it, because somebody's got to quit doing their job to prepare your information. So it's I kind of like a little bit of the wording of that example, because if it's readily available, yeah, it's not that big a deal to get it to you. But if we have to stop, or someone has to stop doing what they're doing to do this, then it could be considered significant, I guess.
So can you speak to what a board meeting Tuesday looks like for you and the cabinet in responding to our requests or questions?
I wouldn't say every Tuesday, but there's been, I know one that we ended up having cabinet mail. I don't remember why we were out there. Oh, new teachers. We're out there for new teachers. But we spent a good 2 hours responding to questions. And then not only did we have cabinet, we pulled a couple other people in to help us with our response. It's probably been a couple times where we've spent I would say, not exaggerating, a couple hours dealing with questions.
From
Board members, yeah.
individuals?
Yes.
And this draft would suggest the threshold for that level of commitment should be whatever, 3 or more, or whatever.
Yeah, kind of back to the statement you made. I mean, who makes the judge of what's governance and what is management? We may interpret this as a management thing, so we shouldn't respond, whereas you may see, no, it is governance, so.
But sometimes I think it's helpful to know what you're thinking is, in terms of a management issue, to ask a question like, okay, I'm not going to even try to think of an example because it'll be really bad, but as to maybe how something works, or how did you make a decision about something, knowing that it is management, but just, I mean, we have to understand how the system works. And some of that is the protocols that you use, working with your staff. Some of it is just, you know, we got into this before with previous boards of, well, why do you need to know that? Are you just curious? And if you're just curious, then you don't need to know it, which I struggle with.
Director Marvin?
Is it useful and might it be helpful if board members with questions just sent questions that they might ask at the board meeting ahead of time and then not expect a response? I mean, is that more doable?
Yeah, I mean, there's some, I mean, what's, the advantage of answering them before is then you don't add that extra time on the board meeting because they got their questions answered.
Okay, I mean, if it's a quick answer, it's one thing, but otherwise, if it's more in-depth, just saying these are some things.
I mean, you've all seen the questions we responded to because I've sent them all to all board members, so.
But
Director Nathan, and then Lord.
So as someone who probably already has a reputation of sending a lot of questions, I will tell you where I'm coming from. So I have sent questions on items that I have to take a vote on or that I have to approve. And I have sent them in the spirit of, I want you to know what I'm thinking and what I might be asking at the board table. So similar to what you said. I felt that I need those questions asked and answered in order to make my decision. Now, as the years go on, maybe those questions will get less.
Right.
I wonder if, going back to this protocol discussion about planning out our work, if maybe on some things, we look at things that are generating a lot of questions and say, do we need a study session on that before we have a briefing item? Because I think part of my anxiety is I only got 2 shots at this before I have to make a decision. I have a briefing and then action, and there's not usually a lot of discussion before the action. So I would rather not, one of the things I remember hearing from MSBA is let's not have any surprises at the board table. So I'm really trying not to have any surprises at the board table by thinking things through and getting the questions ahead of time, even if there are a lot of them. So that's right now.
No, I hear you. I guess I would challenge all board members to ask, the question I'm asking, do I really need to, I get it, having information so you're informed to make a decision, but for example, one of the questions was, which was, I mean, we just had to look it up. We had to look it up because it was quite some time ago. How many responses from parents did we get on the handbook? Do you really need that information to make your decision on the agenda item? It sounded like an easy thing, but it took some time to find that information and track it. Not a lot of time, but it took. So I think it's just, and it's something you learn, I think, as you go. I don't want to discourage questions because you need to be informed to make a good decision, but I think maybe a good question to ask ourselves is, do I really need all of this information to be informed to make a good decision? And if the answer is yes, then we go with it.
I have two things now to respond to. One is that, okay, so somebody asks a bunch of questions and you send it back to us, and then we don't have to ask those questions at the board meeting, but sometimes I think they are really good questions to be asked at the board table, even though everybody knows the answer, because the public needs to be informed. That's number one. The second thing is, we've been talking about tracking decisions, so I'm wondering, you know, what kinds of things might the district want to routinely track or be able to dig out of your data system, like, okay, yeah, we know exactly how many parents responded to this because it's something that we're tracking. I'm not suggesting that you track that thing, but if nobody's tracking anything, then, and I'm not saying you're not tracking anything, but if things aren't being tracked at the school board level and at your level and the cabinet level, and, I mean, even at a principal level, like, I'll give you an example of things we track. How many times was this child absent? How many absences? I mean, those are things that you routinely track. So maybe how many parents had an issue with the student handbook might not be something that you think you should track. The fact that a board member is interested in that in terms of, well, you know, I'm not sure how that would impact a decision, but it might.
Okay, and just as a reminder, we're dealing with the bullet. If a board member has a question or request of a cabinet member, they may contact them directly. The cabinet member will copy the superintendent on the response, and so Director Adamson.
Just speaking for myself, if I sent a question to you and it was going to take a ton of time, I would certainly appreciate an email back that says, this is going to take a ton of time, how important is it? I mean, I have no problem saying, oh, well, you know, I can do without, versus if it's just something you know off the top of your head. So maybe a little bit more of that two-way communication, or this is a big ask, we're going to try really hard to get the answer by the meeting Tuesday night. I just want to let you know I'm not going to be able. But then what Julie said about it's good for the public to know. My understanding of, and I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding of the intention behind the open meeting law is that any information that we all use in our minds to make our decisions should also be available to the public. So some of these things that you're replying to the board should then get presented to the public at a meeting anyway. If it's, you know, if it's how many surveys or whatever, that's probably not something that we're all basing our decision on that information. But in my mind, when I send questions, and I know I don't send that many because I don't always think of them when I'm just reading through a document. I usually think of things when it's being discussed. But when I send questions, and it's usually a heads up, this is something that I'm probably going to ask, rather than really wanting written information before the. So is that something that we can
Well,
agree
it's good to know that. I guess we were under the impression that,
Well, I'm only speaking
kind of back
for
when I said
me.
the cabinet, they got to drop everything and answer right away, so we're under the
Yeah.
impression that we got to
Kathy's
get
the
these
question
questions
asker,
responded
so she should
to
write in.
in a timely manner.
You may feel differently than I do.
Well, I like the suggestion if it's going to be something that's, like, how do you prioritize, right? I mean, if there's a lot of questions and there's something that's going to take a lot of time, that two-way communication would be good to know. Yeah, I need to know it before I take a vote, but I don't necessarily need to know it Monday morning, right? I think that kind of two-way communication is good. I think the other piece is, and again, I keep thinking of our board work, which includes to me some prep work. I don't know that we're necessarily using study sessions as well as we could be. But I always wonder about if we knew more about what was coming as an agenda item. I think you guys did it last year where you talked about, our presentation was, you talked about what you were going to present at the board meeting before you presented it. And the board had a chance to kind of weigh in. Is this the kind of information you need? Do you need more information? I can't remember what the topic was. But that might help, because if you're saying, you know, here's the topics we're going to cover. Have we covered everything? Then when we get the item in board docs, we've already had some common understanding of the information that's going to be in there.
Like a pre-briefing.
Right, well, but it's a study session. It's more
okay.
in depth where we can really talk about it, right, as opposed to, you know, so that.
For every agenda item?
No, but for the ones. Big things. No, big things. That's why I say it kind of fits into this whole conversation about our board work calendar and how we can, like I said, use study sessions, use the opportunity to have discussions before you're at the board table and you have, you know, like I said, one shot at it.
Budget.
Like the budget,
Like the budget,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, Director Nathan, next.
So your language is okay on this bullet we were on?
Adding the, including the
Copy the
superintendent, and then understanding you want them to respond to all board members.
Using discretion, right,
What do
Wendy?
you have, Lindy?
For that first one, I have, they may contact them directly and copy the superintendent. The cabinet member will copy the superintendent. And with discretion, all board members on the response.
Okay, have to remember that. So the next bullet in that section about board members and district staff or legal counsel has to do with legal counsel, and it's the bullet that's there. Individual board members who have questions for legal counsel should discuss them with the board chair. Only the board chair, superintendent, or designee may contact our attorneys.
That's in policy too.
Right, and that's the same language as was there before.
So, so we did talk internally about this because there was some legal question, there was some questions asked of one of our attorneys that did not come through exec. And I think part of the confusion was, I don't even remember what the email was, but whoever, and I don't remember which attorney, but said,
Email
let
me.
me know if you have any questions. So, so when we talked about that, who I don't even know who I was talking about, we talked about we need to follow our process, not, I mean, even if the attorney says, well, let me know if you have any questions. Okay, that's nice that you're saying that, but we need to follow ours, so just a clarification.
I know
So-
exactly of which you speak. Yes, you're right.
So a question on that, so then, if the attorney says, do you have any other questions, and a board member says, yes, I have a question, and sends it to the board chair, and the board chair, is the board chair then going to go ahead and send that question, or is the board chair going to say, I don't think it's worth the attorney's time to, this is a stupid question, I'm not going to send it on. Do you see what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, you have served 2 stints as board chair, haven't you? So what have you done?
I don't know if we've had, well, that's what is supposed to happen. I don't know if I ever got that many requests that needed to go to legal counsel.
And nor I, for that matter, in the formal sense, but I think you do make a good point. I think the board chair is more being informed and having limited hands on the steering wheel, so to speak, versus trying to control what is being asked or requested. I believe that's the intent.
Okay, so that's the section on staff and legal counsel. The next section in the April draft talks about agendas and board meetings. And in my suggestion, I simply move that to the very end of the document because we still have one section of communication. And there are only grammatical comments I put in. So unless anybody else has any comments on those 3 bullets under agendas and board meeting, I did not have any.
Superintendent or cabinet?
Oh, that's later. So did you want this ordered differently?
Yeah, I said, so this agenda's board meetings, I would put at the very end of the document because we still have one section on
Okay.
communication, or 2 communications among groups, between groups, within groups. Within. So unless anybody else has any comments on those 3 bullets, we can go on. Okay.
I see the agenda/board meetings on the, on the back, but you said
All
there's
the-
bullets with
All
them?
the way on the back.
Oh, all the way on the back.
On the back of the page you were just on, Mike. No.
You're talking about the draft, the
It'd
first
be
draft?
page 4, there on the,
Take your packet over there.
I don't have a picture.
Yeah, it's on the top of that page you just had in your hand. No.
this,
Yeah, I don't have.
He's got the different document.
Right.
Yeah.
So can
Are you talking about the one you sent?
No, the 3 bullets that are in the draft from April, no changes except little grammar changes. Yes. So,
Oh, it's on, it's
It's
this
the
one,
same.
and then it's on the back of that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just
So
looking
no,
on the new one
just,
that we have.
yeah, no, just little wordy grammar changes. So unless anybody has anything substantive, I don't.
Let me find those before we
Okay.
move on.
This might be our protocol
Okay.
discussion.
Again, agendas, board meetings.
Yes.
Should there also be something in here to say that a board member can bring an item to be added to the agenda at the meeting, but it has to have, is it a second for that?
I think we should just make the policy reference. I think it's silly to belabor a protocol document, and so I just put on my sheet, it's policy 20305 for more clarity.
Okay, that's, I'm
Yes.
good with
And then
that.
if we,
Did you just know that policy?
No.
I wondered if you'd memorized
She
it.
does, she's on the policy committee.
when I
now.
looked
She's
at this,
got
I'm
all
like,
the
well, why are we rewriting it? Because isn't that in policy?
Right.
So does that capture what we were talking about earlier this evening about we're in a meeting, somebody recommends this, so I think something needs to be added to capture
Right.
that.
The discussion of whether it's a vote, and whether it's a second and it goes to exec
Yeah.
versus a majority vote, and
Yeah.
does it happen at the end of the meeting?
Yeah.
That protocol piece, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Can we go through the rest of it and table that? Okay. Because that way we can just focus on
Yeah.
that. All right, so tabling that piece, we're going back. The next section is communication between the superintendent, board members, and stakeholders. So if you go down to that section, there's that introductory language. It says, we believe in the importance of hearing from our stakeholders. I wanted to recommend adding, we believe in the importance of hearing from and replying to our stakeholders, because we like two-way communication. That's all. So, okay, so I moved some bullets from, that had previously been in board communications to this section, and this is where I saw the conflict between what we had said before. So if you look at the really ugly one, I'm sorry, the things that are in red and green are all the bullets together, so I'll read them. The chair will respond to emails addressed to the full board. I think that's the protocol that we've been following this year. So if we all get it, the chair responds to it. If an individual board member receives an email, it will be forwarded to the chair and the superintendent to respond. Bear with me, just go through the language. The board member may reply to the sender with an acknowledgement that the email was received and forwarded. I also don't want you to jump down and look at bullet 5, where it says, community, staff, parent, and student inquiries received by board members will be directed to the chain of command, chain of communication. So in reading those, I feel like there's a conflict, because if I get an email and it's a question about a class, the first bullet says, forward it to the board chair and the superintendent. The second bullet says, tell them to go to their principal.
So one is a governance item, one is an operational item.
Well, that's what I'm, right, trying to distinguish between. Which emails would we forward to the board chair and the superintendent, and which emails would we look at the chart and say,
Yeah, I guess what I saw the difference is emails follow this process. Face-to-face, somebody calls you or corners you at the grocery store, you would follow the chain of command, depending if it's, the example I think somebody over here said, you send them right, to you talk to your student support service person. I mean, that's how I see the difference. Emails.
If Jean gets an email from somebody saying, are they offering this class at JM? it doesn't make any sense for her to forward that email to the superintendent and share. She should email that person and say, you need to talk to your school directly.
Right, right, yes.
So then there's the conflict you were talking about, yes.
Right.
So I personally, the chain of communication chart is very helpful. So one of the compromises I thought was, something that was in one of Deborah's example, Dr. Seelinger's examples from when we started this was, and I'll just read it to you. Board members will refer stakeholders with positive or negative comments regarding school district operations to the proper staff person or administrator according to the district chain of communication. Board members should also forward these referrals to the superintendent. So we let you know we got an email, we let you know we told them to contact the principal, but we copy you on it so you know that we're sending people to Brenda or to the principal or wherever.
Did you say chain of communication?
I said chain of, did I say communication or command?
Well,
Communication.
yeah, what does it say on that?
It doesn't say anything.
Okay, because we've referred to it in the past as the chain of command, which to me is, I like chain of communication a whole lot better because
They're both in
command
the
sort
draft,
of,
so.
in me, has a negative connotation, but that might not be true for me.
So, do you want me to read it again? Board members will refer stakeholders with positive or negative comments regarding school district operations to the proper staff person or administrator according to the district chain of communication. Board members should also forward these referrals to the superintendent.
I like that.
So then we would do away with the complaint form that,
Well, that's a second question. These are negative comments. So that was distinguished in this other document, which I wanted to point out. The second piece of this, and this was something that I had struggled with and I've asked for advice from previous board members. If we get something from an individual, I don't know that they want me to forward it. So, I've had the conversation with some board members about whether it's appropriate to, before I forward it, email that person back and say, is it okay if I forward this with your identifying information? Because sometimes if they know that they're going to be talked about, and if it's not going to be anonymous, they don't want it to go anywhere. I don't know what their expectation of privacy is once they've sent us an email.
But you're a public figure.
Shouldn't be.
I know,
There
I am
no
just
expectation.
asking, right.
in my opinion, it's treated just like when I get a letter that's not signed, I read it.
So do I.
Right.
Well, because you can't respond to it.
I mean, yeah, I
Right.
mean, in my opinion, if you're not willing to own up to your complaint or your question, then you shouldn't expect it to be addressed. Maybe we could say this statement. This is from Unified District in California. The last stop, not the first, will be the school board. We agree to follow the chain of command, but I like your chain of communication.
Actually, that was
Sounds
Kathy's,
more
I just
positive.
questioned it.
So I like your wording better. And insist that others do so. While the board is eager to listen to its constituents and staff, each inquiry is to be referred to the person who can properly exponentially address the issue, which is kind of what you're saying.
Right,
Send it to the person who can
right.
address the issue.
And let you know what it is.
But, you know, I think there are a lot of people in the public who don't understand. I mean, yeah, we're elected officials, but I mean, we're sort of like the orphan of elected officials. And they see us more as, well, you're involved with school and you're approachable and maybe you're really nice people. And I'm going to ask this question, and yes, I'm expecting you to keep it private. So they might not understand that when they do send a question like this to an elected official, that it very well could be public. So in that sense, before you forward it, you might, or forward it to Mike, you might say, you know, do you understand that this really is a public kind of question? I don't know what word you want to use. But still get their permission, because then they might change their mind and say, no, I want to be anonymous, so just drop it.
I
I
guess
think part of your practice and your protocol is you're training people on how you will handle questions and concerns. Because you all know, you've been in even the two of you have been in long enough to know, once you handle it a certain way, then that's the expectation. This is how this board member is going to handle complaints or concerns, so.
So if let me do the scenario. I get an email, it's something I can identify where it goes on the chain of communication, I'm ready to email it to you. Is it appropriate protocol for me to email that person back and say, I am forwarding it to this person and sending it out?
If that's what you want, we would just have to really have a good conversation with building administrators and make them aware, because I can tell you, if we don't, when they get that first email from you, they're going to react a certain way.
The building people.
Yes.
Yeah,
then
so if I may quickly and briefly, transportation-related issues, I will refer to the executive director, Scott.
Right.
Who then
But do you
will-
send it to Scott?
Yeah.
Or do you say?
I send it to
please-
Scott, and then he
please
reaches
contact
out
Scott.
to his.
So you forward the
person,
email?
right.
But I don't know if it's, if that's our role as school board members to be sending, even if it's a nice question, to Scott and say, please respond. That's your job. So maybe the email should go to Mike and say, Mike, here this is, if you want to copy Scott on the original thing. But I think we really have to leave that decision up to the superintendent rather than, oh, Kathy said she wants me to respond to this person, and somebody else wants me to respond to this person, and then that's all that you're doing.
Yeah, but keep in mind, we just have gone over a protocol that now establishes that. Cabinet, superintendent.
So, as former
I don't
principals
understand.
in our district, how would you react if a board member forwards you an email that complaint from a parent?
It's a terrible feeling, sinking feeling, and I guess you have to reflect on why the person didn't connect with you directly, but it doesn't, it's a difficult spot to be in.
But maybe they have, and then what?
Oh, if they have, then,
And we don't know it, right?
Right.
We have
Well,
no
that
idea.
would be to me, you use your chain of communication document.
Right.
Your first question would be, have you brought this to the attention of your principal, if that's the route you should go? I would prefer that we continue bringing them to me, and I work with Jackie, she works with the building principal. I'm just a little nervous how some principals may react if that email's coming directly from a board member.
So, I'm pretty sure so far what I have done is emailed the person back and said, I think the person you want to talk to is this person, and here's their email. And I have not forwarded it directly to the staff person or I've let them take the next step. Identified it on the chain of command
Yeah,
and identified the next step, as
I think
opposed to
that's- I think
having
that's fine.
that. And then probably CC'd you on it so that you knew I did that.
Yeah, I'm just a little nervous from them. Parent B complains to you, you send the complaint, the email comes from you.
Right.
Oh my God, I'm in trouble now. I got an email from the board member about this complaint,
You
so
all don't feel that way about it.
not all of them would react that way, but I know some that would.
be on the phone immediately.
Yeah, they'd be calling, am I in trouble?
So can we write the protocol that way then, to say, board members will refer stakeholders with positive or negative comments to the proper staff person according to the district chain of command or communication? But not forward the email? I mean, like, should we say that?
Provide contact.
Provide contact information?
I've gotten emails about, well, why do I have to pay this much money to rent this room? It's not fair. And then I say, contact Amy Ike on
Right.
this. But I might also put you in the loop so that you know maybe that this person is coming to pound on your door and scream about something. Would that be acceptable to cabinet members if we?
Oh, I'm not, so much worried about these guys.
Yeah, you're worried about
No,
building.
Just the building
Building.
principal.
We're building principles.
Yeah.
Director Marvin, go ahead.
Kathy, I think that your suggestion's a good one, is to respond to the person writing the email saying, here's who you need to send it to, and put the ball back in their court. I'm reluctant to just automatically forward everything, because I do think we have a number of people in the community who don't know that's what our protocol is, and I think that they could feel really betrayed. They didn't want anybody else to know about it. They didn't want it to go to whomever. And I think we have to give them the option, give the writer the option of taking the next step or not.
I remember an email when you were chair that went to a principal and to you and maybe some other board members, and you replied that you left it in the capable hands of the principal. It was a wonderful, reassuring message, I think, both to the parent, hopefully,
Sounds
and
like a
to the
really good
principal.
response.
It wasn't. I thought, it would have felt,
Those
you know,
were the
it still
days.
is an alarming thing to get, I think, for the
Sure.
principals, but that the fact that you instilled confidence by assuring them that the principal was the place to take
Just
it.
that kind of person.
You are.
You are, absolutely.
It was lovely.
So how's this language? Board members will provide stakeholders who have positive or negative comments about school district operations with contact information for the proper staff person or administrator according to the chain of communication.
And will alert the appropriate staff person at their discretion. Because isn't that what we decided, that sometimes you guys would appreciate a heads up that something's coming?
But would principals appreciate that from board members, because we're farther away from
How
them?
about
We're
cabinet?
talking about cabinet.
Yeah, I think if you
Or
would just
superintendent.
CC me on how you respond to parent, then depending on who needs to be informed.
You can.
You can get the
Okay.
heads up.
And we'll CC the superintendent. Got it. Wendy, I'm writing this one down. Okay, I got it. All right, I'm putting Wendy next to it. Okay, so, and then superintendent asked about this notice of complaint that we were given, I don't remember when, probably in April. So I looked at the difference. In the notice of complaint, there's a definition. Involves an allegation that a person under the authority of a school district violated a law, violated a district policy, regulation, rule, or procedure, or engaged in appropriate conduct. So my suggested language was, board members, because this is for us to fill out, this is a board member complaint form. Board members receiving complaints as defined on the notice of complaint form should complete and submit the form as indicated. Somebody will have to know a little bit more about the history of this form to distinguish between what we were just talking about and when it rises to the
I
level
guess
of that.
I based on the previous protocol that we just established, to me it eliminates that. Because the purpose of that, if I remember correctly, which was one of the things that was in the letter, that the suggestion was, if you get a complaint, if you want me to do something about it, I need to know who I need to work with. And that's why the document was created. So the complaint would be brought to me, and then we could reach out to the individual to work, to address their complaint. And so the process you set up
Covers all that.
covers that, so we really wouldn't need the form anymore, because we're gonna have, if that person falls through on what you suggest, the person's gonna know who it is.
I think this is a really important form to have, because I think it covers our legal bases. As a school board member, if I get a legal complaint that somebody has violated a law, I personally would appreciate the protection that the paperwork would provide, that I did my due diligence in reporting something that was theoretically very serious. And I think the paper trail would help all parties involved. So, I mean, I like the complaint form, but I hope I'll never have to use it.
I think you made a really good point.
Read the top part again, I guess I'm not aware of.
The
When
definition
it's
of
used,
complaint.
yeah.
Well, complaints are to be distinguished from general expressions of concern. A complaint involves an allegation that a person under the authority of the school district violated a law, violated a district policy, regulation, rule, or procedure, or engaged in inappropriate conduct. This was written before I got here, so I'm looking at all you.
Wasn't, or Mike, wasn't this a direct result of
Yeah, I don't know where that came from.
I think that's
past
what we're going
boards
Well-
questioning or wanting to hold you perhaps accountable to some degree in terms of what things were maybe you were unaware of, and so I think he requested the development of a form to allow board members to begin to.
Yeah, I that's my understanding, but I guess I don't ever remember it being that specific. It only should be used for these situations. My understanding it was for all complaints that we got.
That's what it says.
This is written by me.
Yes.
I don't remember that one.
Is there an
Yeah, I don't remember that part.
Is there an official form number or anything, or just something you?
No, this is what you sent me.
So I think maybe the original complaint form was just to keep Mike in the loop so that we didn't say to him, oh, Mike, this parent has this problem, but it's down on paper and it's something you can follow through. And I think this kind of maybe evolved out of it as the more serious stuff that you really need to, and like Melissa said, creating a paper trail. So, yes, this person did talk to you about this, and yes, you did report it, and yes, you did get the form, and then it's in your hands to deal with the attorney or whoever else, rather than the person coming back and saying, hey, I told you about this, and nothing happened. You didn't, yep, I did my due diligence, so.
That may explain a couple things, why I've never received one of those forms in the years that we've had it in place, but I guess my original understanding was for any kind of complaint, but maybe I need to read things a little more closely next time in the future, but.
So then, Kathy, your question, is there a question, or what are you?
Well, the question is, what do we do with this form? Because it exists. Do we write a protocol to go with it? Do we think that first protocol we talked about covers it? Or what do I do?
Can you pass that form down?
Sure.
I don't, if I had my laptop here, I could find the original one that Meg sent me, but I don't have my laptop with me.
I think it should be written down. If it's an important legal document, it should be referenced in the protocol. My opinion.
How about we hear from Carl, who's sitting over there so patiently?
Right.
Is there anything in the, from the employee side, I mean, because we are employees, if they are, you know, see something similar to what we're talking about in a colleague,
I'd have to read it. I'm a visual person. From what I heard, though, it became pretty general at the end about pretty much any kind of complaint. And as long, even if you documented it in an email, you'd have a paper trail that you've been made aware of a concern and brought it to our attention. So I don't know if that form would provide any additional protection necessarily. But it seemed to start out very specific, and then it kind of got
Regulation, rule,
pretty broad.
procedures, so it's pretty more engaging. So,
Well, procedures aren't under the jurisdiction of the board.
Thank you.
I mean, for the time being, we could just add a bullet. Board members may provide stakeholders with complaint form as appropriate.
Oh, the complaint form is written for us to fill out. It's not, the stakeholders don't fill this out. We're supposed to fill it out.
That's correct.
But, I mean, the intent, my intent was that there's a name connected to it, so we know who we need to follow up.
Yeah,
I mean, because
yeah.
if somebody, I mean,
Yeah.
that was,
It's on there.
my whole concern was, if you bring a complaint to me and don't tell me who brought the complaint, it's really hard to investigate and address it when we don't know who it is.
I'm wondering if we should take the word procedure off the end of it, because procedures are not under board jurisdiction, they're under your jurisdiction. And so if a procedure hasn't been followed, and somebody talks to me about it or sends me an email, I would refer them to the chain of communication. Because that's definitely below the line. But for some of this other stuff, which could be really important, I mean, does it hurt to have this paper? I don't think it hurts. I mean, you might have the same thing in an email, but if you know, Mike's got a folder and he's got 3 things in it, it's really gonna be easy to pull it out and say, hey, here it is. We did what we were supposed to. I'm following up with whoever's complaining. That's serious.
Well, I know we're going to lose one of our board members in a minute or two. Director Schuler's going to have another meeting he has to go to. And did you have any thoughts before you leave, Mark?
I withdraw. Email's fine. It's a form that's rarely used. And the proper chain of communication does seem right to me.
Are you opposed to the form?
Whatever people's comfortable with.
So you're not opposed to the form?
No, I would fill it out, but I just sent an email.
So it's not mandatory?
Is it
It's
something to
an option.
revisit with our legal counsel? No? I mean, it came from somewhere.
Well, it was part of this big old letter that got dumped on me, to be honest with you. And
Yes.
I got
Okay, yeah,
my
I'm now in context.
My explanation was, if you want me to deal with complaints, I need to know who I need to work with.
I think I would offer, it was very important to a previous board, and while we honor their history, it may not be important to the current board to retain.
I agree.
So then, what was mentioned earlier, the last protocol reference addresses and provides a mechanism for addressing complaints and/or concerns. And isn't that good enough? And to that end, I would say yes. And if that document has outlived its usefulness, as it was originally intended to accomplish, which we now know, Director Adamson, it was tied to specific things, not necessarily broad application of how we as district employees respond to or address, matters of legality. So that being said, and there's no decision to be made, it wouldn't hurt probably to ask legal counsel if it's okay to get rid of it.
I'll have to check the actual letter that came with all this stuff, and I don't know if it's written that it carries, because that was a 1-year contract, so that's done and gone. This is a new contract, so it may not even be in play anymore because we're in a new contract, and I agree with what Deborah said. I think it's probably had more meaning to former members than current members.
And Deborah, is there a complaint policy? And does it refer to a form?
We have a policy meeting tomorrow, don't we?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so
So Wendy, I have identified for notes what gets deleted and added, so I'll get it to you. So in
So
the
we're
same,
going to delete that portion, right? The form, or not?
yes, well, right now, the bullet that says board members receiving complaints will complete the provided form, that bullet's gone.
Done.
Yep.
Perfect.
Yep. Okay, so the other stakeholder bullets, the chair or superintendent will do follow-up communication with public comment speakers as necessary.
Yeah, can we talk about that one? We've had a few who went through everybody in Jackie's office, met with me individually, came to the board. I don't know what more follow-up I can give than I already did when I've met with that person one-on-one, so.
To me, it's just that. It's the board, we've heard from this person. That's what I think. It's not a directive to do more action. It's, we are aware this has been discussed, and because we don't know that.
That'd be super helpful.
Yeah.
And I would suggest that this is announced at the beginning of the public comment session, that the chair or superintendent will follow up with public comment speakers as necessary. In that case, it wouldn't be necessary. Mainly because I think a lot of people show up and they figure, okay, we're going to have a dialogue right now, and then we just sit. Or others are just passionate and people behind them are waiting for something. And I think sometimes we give the impression we didn't hear you or we don't care. So I think simply saying that if necessary, if somebody will get back to you, but it may not be always appropriate or necessary.
I mean, for example, the one person that came twice, I think in one of the Friday updates, I let you know that Scott and the individual met with the individual.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is right on the nose, is what I think
But
this
the,
is
like the
saying.
woman who came last week who had some pamphlets,
Yeah.
no one needs to follow up
Well,
with her.
and I think there are a number who don't expect any
Right.
follow-up, but I think if we could just announce that for the, education of people who are showing up,
Because
that might be useful.
Does the city council have dialogue during their public comment time? I think they do.
Oh, yeah.
That makes their midnight meetings?
I think one that kind of falls under this for me, Mike, was, and I don't remember which one it was, but it might have been an exception to attendance, that they came, and I think, I think there was a resolution at some point,
Yes.
and I think you just mentioned it in passing to me
Yes.
at one point. It was like, oh, I guess that was something that I would have liked to have known, yes, we've dealt with this parent, and I don't care what it was, but just that it had been,
Right.
so that they weren't just standing there spouting without.
There used to be a statement that was read at the beginning of public comments. It was maybe a long, long time ago, but just what you talked about, but something that we all decided on needed to be. So I support what Jean says about having something that's always communicated.
Yep. Next bullet, the chair will respond to media requests on behalf of the board. That was in the previous draft, and I don't know if superintendent or our communications team that's the right language. I think the intent is if a board member gets a media request, we send it to the board chair and they respond on our behalf.
And then what happens if the chair isn't there and the vice chair isn't there, and they just need a quick answer? Is there a chain of communication for that?
It's fine. It's okay.
No, I mean, if there's a meeting that afternoon and media calls and says, I can't get a hold of Don, and I said, well, call Deborah. Can't get a hold of Deborah. I say, I just need somebody to answer this one question. Heather, never mind.
You just got referenced, Heather, it's okay. So is that a little okay, the way it's written? That.
Mike, do you have any problems with that particular bullet?
Call Heather.
Jeez. I don't know, you might be, because there's been a couple inquiries that Don and I talked about who, and I think I ended up doing the interview, so I don't know if you want to add the chair or the superintendent will respond to
Okay.
media.
No, I think I wouldn't do that, Mike, because I think what we're saying is if the media wants a response from the
Okay.
board,
I got it.
that chair is the one
Okay.
who.
All right, got it.
Okay.
Or the chair's designated.
Chair's designated.
Yeah. Okay. Is that good? All right. Next one was anonymous, oh gosh, I'm sorry. Anonymous concerns will be forwarded to the superintendent for information purposes only. And I didn't know if we should change that to comments since we used comments in the other one.
Yeah.
Meaning we're not expecting a response. And then, I think this is an addition. So this is sort of reflects what we've seen this year, and it's updates on stakeholder issues that have been brought to the board will be provided to board members by the superintendent by email or in weekly update as appropriate. So, for example, the public comment person, you sent us an update in the weekly update that said, we talked to this person about the issue that they brought up.
Yeah, but I think some of them are, like the example I gave earlier, I mean, there's no need to follow, I've already met with the individual, and she didn't get the answer she wanted.
Right, but you
So I
told
don't know
us
what-
that you met with them. That's it.
Oh, key language as appropriate.
That, I
So-
said as appropriate, right.
Got it.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that.
You have been doing a good job updating us.
Well, there's been some I know that they've spoken, and I haven't.
Right.
Well, and sometimes they like to play the game. Well, I contacted the superintendent, and the superintendent didn't respond, but if we've already heard from you, yeah, I did respond, it's like, okay, they didn't like the answer.
Okay.
Right.
I mean, that's helpful for us
Okay,
in
we are
knowing how to deal with.
on the home stretch here. So the last category is board members as community ambassadors, and what you will like to hear is that there were no changes to the language from the April, with the exception of the question about the last bullet, some clarification of building meetings expressly for parents should not be attended. I don't know that we ever got through, is that during the school day, is it those called by the principal? I think we said it excluded PTA meetings because that's sort of outside, but what does that mean?
I think a meeting that's specifically called just for parents. Board members shouldn't be there, the superintendent shouldn't be there.
What if the board member is a parent?
That's, you're a parent. But,
I mean, a parent of that
Someone in
particular
the
group.
school.
I mean, because I'm a parent too,
Yeah.
but my kids are grown up,
Yeah.
kind of.
you know, we're having a meeting with the school parents to get characteristics for their next principal. That's just for parents. Some of our buildings have, I don't know what they call it, parent
Chat with the principal.
advisory or parent something meetings.
Job with principal?
No.
Yeah, I think it's just for parents of that school. I don't attend those, it's just designed for parents, is I think kind of what I'm thinking for that.
What if a board member is invited by the principal to be at that chat? If that's okay.
different.
So what you're
That's
saying is if we are invited by somebody in the organization to be there, it's okay, but we should not just automatically assume and insert ourselves into those conversations.
I think I need additional clarification. So like when there was the, I can't remember what the word was, when we were talking about the building referendum and we were reporting out, what are they called? Community.
Oh.
Community focus,
No.
the
No,
community,
Community-
citizen voice meetings?
Citizens'
Yeah.
Voice, thank you.
No, those
Citizens'
are public,
voices.
those are public meetings, those are open to anybody and everybody. I'm talking about meetings that are designed specifically for just a specific audience.
So this would be mostly building level.
Building level.
Yeah. Oh,
Building
yeah.
level. Could we maybe
Building
put,
meetings.
but
Building meetings.
Unless
I
invited.
think the problem comes in the wording that says expressly for parents. I mean, how are we supposed to know which ones are expressly for parents? So I would just like a little more specific definition. I don't know what's expressly for parents.
parents, you wouldn't have been invited.
Well,
That's my-
to me,
Well,
I
then
mean,
how
to
would I
me,
know
it's
about
the,
it?
you know,
That's
it's,
what
it's
Then it would be a
whatever.
problem.
Longfellow puts on their Facebook page or whatever,
Right.
meeting for parents to identify characteristics in our next principal. To me, that is a meeting for Longfellow parents. Yes, it's a public, it's shown up in the public sphere, but I don't need my opinion on what they need in a Longfellow
So if
principal.
Falwell parents wouldn't go to it, neither should I? Is that a good rule of
Yeah.
thumb?
Yeah.
I just, I read this and I'm like, oh no, I don't understand the categories.
That
So,
makes sense.
Should we add unless invited?
yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I don't think there's very many of these, but I think it's, to me, the intention is more, and I'm certainly guilty of it, I like to think that I blend in with all the other animals in the forest, but as Jackie has kindly told us, when board members are around, sometimes people
Say different things.
say different things, or they act a different way, or whatever. So to me, it's also just sort of being like, what is the governance role in being there? What are we trying to gain? And could it be a detriment? Because I would hate that a parent would not feel comfortable talking about what characteristics they want in their principal just because I'm sitting there. So,
It does, but it won't help with what I don't know. I mean, something might happen 2 months in the future, I might go cringe, so then I'll clarify with somebody.
For our former principals, would principals welcome a phone call if we were curious and just say, hey, I saw this on your Facebook page, I'm not clear what this is. Would I be welcome or not?
Yeah.
But we have to be willing to say, it's okay either way. We'd have to be, I know, right, because
Yeah,
that was,
I
we made first
think we go back
contact,
to
I
what Deborah
know
said.
that.
Is there a governance role for you to be at that meeting? Because if you call me as a board member, as a principal, can I come? I'm going to tell you, yeah. I'm not going to tell you no.
I know.
Think about last year when we did the student listening post, and sometimes we had staff stop in and sit, and it changes kind of the tone
Yes.
of what kids are willing
Yes,
to talk
it
about.
is.
Same kind of thing with student school board.
Right, yeah,
Where
yeah, yeah.
it's student school
Yeah.
board and
What was
no,
the
you're not
intention
welcome.
of the meeting?
I get it.
Yeah.
So adding unless invited.
I
That's
think
where we
less
left. Is that
invited.
okay?
I would caution just because what you
Some
just said,
people are too
Jackie.
nice.
Some people are too nice and maybe an appropriate email call is to you or Mike to say, hey, I saw this meeting. Do you have, I mean, it sounds really interesting to me. What do you think?
Yeah.
And then
Yep.
going from there
I
because
can-
I don't want to.
Right.
So contact the superintendent for some advice on that as opposed to the principal, even if you say, it's fine to say no, and they're gonna go,
Right.
it's the school board.
But you guys won't be afraid to say no to us.
No.
Oh, no.
Can you include the word intended? Building meetings intended expressly for parents?
Okay, perfect. Did you see that, Wendy? Building meetings intended expressly for parents? Right, those are all of the comments
That you had.
that I had.
Okay, Deborah, I think you had, Deborah, in
Yes,
terms of protocols?
I did. I have 3 bullet items. One, we touched on, I wonder, I might have a pin and something that I don't know about. One we touched on earlier about a self-assessment evaluation, which we have talked about and around. And if that is something we want to put in protocols. I don't feel strongly about doing that. I think if we are so inclined, we could just do it. Seems like I saw an example of that.
I'm sorry, did I hear you say the board self-assessment?
Yeah, so on this example from Bath County, when and how the board conducts a self-evaluation, and the protocol says the board self-evaluation is conducted annually. I don't know that that's a protocol item. It might be a policy add. I look at Wendy because I
But-
like.
You know, if you have it on a calendar, then we're, like, oh, were we gonna do self-evaluation for them in August? I mean, I think it just really can help to keep people focused. That's all. And if we decide, no, we don't wanna do it, that's okay.
I mean, a few of the district protocols I looked at, they did have it stated that the board would do an annual evaluation as a protocol. I mean, I didn't look at a whole bunch of them, but
I don't have super strong feelings either way, but I do wonder if it sits better in policy.
I would rather have it in protocol because policy is harder to change. So if we decided one year we're not gonna do self-evaluation, then we've gotta go through the whole policy change piece,
Of
right?
course, that assumes that we are all willing to do a self-evaluation.
Well, right.
I think, do I remember correctly at one of the previous protocol meetings that the chair suggested that that might be a subcommittee eventually
True.
to develop that instrument? Okay, and process.
Nothing ever came of that. Now it's an
Well,
opportunity to perhaps recirculate the idea of, are there volunteers?
well, if you put it as a protocol, and then all your protocols are formally voted on, then you're stuck, you have to do one then, so.
I think with your suggestion more as to the actual tool that
Right.
would be used, that the subcommittee would develop the self-evaluation. I mean, I'm perfectly fine with going whatever MSBA
That's what I was
has.
shaking my head.
I mean,
Let's
just do the MSBA about self-evaluation tool. It's a good one. They can give us good feedback if everybody participates.
And having just been at phase 3 training and talking to Gail Gilman, she said, should the board be interested in that process, they would be willing to assist us, and even if they had to walk us through a study session, as opposed to us having to walk ourselves through the process, so. And it's free.
So where are we landing on?
Put it in the protocol, I think.
I think that's fine.
Where, oh, Mark? Mark's
Next item.
good.
Mark, we'll be good with that.
Melissa, are you good?
Okay. So my second one, as I said, I have three, has to do with, again, some of this license statute, board member professional development. And this is partly from some thoughts that Jean brought forward about conferences. And, sorry, I was trying to open my.
Oh, excuse me, very quick, Deborah. In that, probably the remaining two are all related to board, cabinet, I think, unless they want to stay.
Ask Mike.
Oh,
We have to finish that.
Oh, do we have some other?
you weren't finished with,
The agendas of the board. meeting.
Right, the last protocol conversation.
The conversation on parking lot items.
Yes. But I think cabinet doesn't need to be here for that discussion.
okay, and we'll entertain a 5-minute recess to allow cabinet to
What's
disperse.
up, the storms are almost here.
Is it
Yeah.
20 minutes?
Oh, you might,
That was,
Oh, well, do we have a
I think you need to get down there.
We can just go down to the
and
basement.
then they're gonna learn, so they're all there, work together, and then learn how to make